Howdy, all you delicious people. I'm here to review Constantine, City of Demons. At the end of the day, I'm going to go out of my way to talk about this animated movie in a very cryptic-like sense, give you a double 5 time count, and then go into spoilers about this movie. Ultimately, you can go out of your way to say that you had seen this film by doing one of two things. You could ultimately download the CW Seed app. That's CW space SEED. You can ultimately download that app for absolutely free and ultimately watch this movie as two parts, bizarrely. Or you could go somewhere else and just kind of rent the movie and watch it in its entirety, or maybe you have some app that you can dare in fact just watch this movie for absolutely free regardless. So, how did I feel about this animated film? Well, sure, far enough, in a very cryptic like sense, this movie was rated a solid R. And by and large, I just want to say R about this movie because I really loved it. Oh my god. What an amazing animated film. Reasonably, I think story wise, I think Batman's Under the Red Hood is still the best, like, written, even though it's probably adapted, written animated movie. I think that this is, like, the best animated DC movie that I've seen in quite a while. And I know reasonably within this movie there probably is like a bit of like clunky things here and there, but I think I'm like, God, I want there to be like an animated Constantine series because I think that it will go way much more better than the live action version. I think if you honestly gave people a rated R Constantine series and it was actually like done and animated, I think like I honestly would love the crap out of it and would love to watch it. I honestly am just kind of godsmacked that like why did we have to have like an animated Harley Quinn series? I think we've kind of almost done Harley Quinn almost a little bit too much. I would love for them to have actually done an animated Constantine film or Constantine series that's rated R. Because I think realistically, I think Constantine is a great character done the correct way. When probably looking at the Keanu Reeves film was kind of just like, to me, it was just kind of a just, eh, like it really didn't go anything along the lines of the comic books. It just went and did its own thing. Going into the show, I had that show at points win me over. And I watched the entire thing. I have the entire thing for for a very reasonable price, and I actually really enjoyed how different the Constantine show was compared to all the other DC shows and this and that. Um, this this animated film takes a lot of risks. It does a lot of dicey esh like things for a rated R film, even for a rated R film. Um, but man, did I just really enjoy the one of a kind like thing that this movie otherwise provides. There's some bizarre things going on in this movie. There's quite a bit of bizarre things going on in this movie. I think this film has the best animated movie opener that I've probably ever seen. It seems like the opening of the film actually seems important, and also actually helps you um, kind of like the opening helps the finishing of the movie, and I kind of like that. I kind of like it. Ultimately, again, trying as much as possible to talk about this in a very cryptic like sense. I guess I can easily tell people there isn't a huge amount of like other random or other kind of just DCS like characters that go outside the Constantine bubble, or you're not ultimately going to be seeing any other magic users that, of course, would lead to a Justice League Dark movie or something like that. You're not all of a sudden going to see Batman in this movie. You're not all of a sudden going to see Zatanna in this film. You're not going to see Doctor Fate or Boston Brand, aka Deadman. Um, which ultimately I was kind of confused at some point if that is the person of which they're doing in this movie, but evidently not. So really, I like the fact that this movie is a tiny bit goofy. There's one real huge goofy thing about this film, but then everything else just kind of is very much like really sticks the landing with I think really overall Constantine, and how a lot of the times when you think that Constantine wins, he really loses. Or a lot of times when like it kind of feels like there's no way out for Constantine, he eventually bluffs, or just kind of figures out some kind of loophole or this and that. I do really like that this really kind of ties into Constantine's origin story. I do like that, and that origin story is really great and really interesting. Um, I don't think there's otherwise any really bad things I could say about this animated movie. Like hands down, like I felt like this was better than a lot of the other stuff that I've seen lately. And some of that stuff was really bad. Like especially like Justice League versus Teen Titans. Man, was that a just ugh like, and Suicide Squad Hell to Pay. Man, was that some that was a bizarrish movie experience to go into. Um, any number of just more recent titles. I haven't seen the Justice League Dark Apocalypse War, whatever that is. The newest animated movie, because I just don't think it's going to be good enough for me to really watch and enjoy. But man, did I, like I said, I really enjoyed this one. I'm kind of very happy that I took the time to otherwise watch this movie. It kind of does really play out like a little bit of a God, what is it? Devil May Cry or something like that. It kind of plays out like that a little. Um, I really like how we stick to a theme that Constantine has to really just stick to, like bigger is better kind of thing, or like kind of like take Peter to beat Paul kind of thing. I kind of like the way of which Constantine overall really goes about this story. So I think there's only so much that I can also talk about this movie in a very cryptic like sense. So I think it's about that time to go into spoiler like sense. So ultimately, you don't really need to get to know this Constantine character in a pre like sense. You don't need to watch the entire Constantine show and then watch this movie. No, it basically gives you an origin of the character within the movie. It kind of really does kind of give you like some events that basically tell you this character's story, which I honestly enjoy. So, let's go into spoilers about City of Demons, Constantine, City of Demons. So, let's go into spoiler territory because, like, if you haven't seen this movie, I would dare say go out of your way to see it for absolutely free because ultimately I felt if you have consistently kind of watched a bulk of these, or like you're an older woman or gent that ultimately wants to see a rated R supernatural animated movie, definitely check this out. It's an origin film, so you don't need any other prior things and this and that. I honestly liked the Justice League Dark animated movie. I kind of had like some winning over vibes of that as well. Um, but anyways, spoiler time. Spoiler time. You can watch this movie at any time for absolutely free. So ultimately, you can come back honestly and hear what I had to say about actual spoilers about all this. So let's spoil this movie. So we have it to where John has a real origin story. Like at the very beginning of this, we have John Constantine, who is a straight jacket, insane person that is ultimately like he can't stop doing magic. Like it's just he just can't stop doing magic. Ultimately, a friend of his named Chaz, I'm assuming that is like Chaz Kramer or Chandler Kramer, who of course was in the movie Shia LaBeouf's character that was ultimately kind of the confidant um, of Constantine. That was kind of like his driver or his Robin character to Constantine's Batman. Um, he's a Tonto or Robin. But anyways, we have it to where Constantine ultimately tends to be a guy that otherwise gets freaking people either vanish to another plane of existence or ultimately he deals in a lot of possessions. So ultimately there is a girl that seems to be some kind of possessed, and John Constantine has to figure out exactly like, okay, what is wrong with this girl. So ultimately he summons the nightmare nurse, which ultimately I'm like, okay, good. So like once he was gonna summon somebody, I was like, man, don't tell me it's that he's gonna just summon some like Doctor Fate or some other like character from the DC. No, like they kind of keep the bubble really cemented that it's like, okay, we're gonna keep it in the Constantine world, and you're not gonna know who exactly like the nightmare nurse, you're not going to know who she is right away. But before speaking of nightmares, before, like, right in between the time of which we go and meet this possessed girl and also like kind of in between um John Constantine's origin story, we have it seemingly like Constantine is waking up. He's waking up, and then all of a sudden, there is all of these kind of little minion esque like creatures that look exactly like him, but are very demonic, are very um, estranged. Man, did I enjoy a sequence of John Constantine just like grabbing these little creatures and throwing them around and killing them and smacking them around between one another. Ultimately, realizing that his subconscious is trying to kill him. I thought that that was really interesting how it was like basically like the dream world was trying to kill Constantine. And like I thought that that was fascinating. Q, the nightmare nurse, ultimately she is dissecting who is ultimately possessing this girl, and it is ultimately some guy who otherwise has been kind of very much stitched up in this and that. Eventually Constantine eventually finds, or the demon goes into nightmare nurse and ultimately gives a actual address of where Constantine needs to go. Eventually we lead to where ultimately John Constantine in a flashback form is a much more younger person. Ultimately being in a band, ultimately strumming up some concert, and we have it to where Constantine is eventually going out of his way to meet this ritual-esque like person that is very demon-esque. And so Constantine can't beat this demon himself. So ultimately, he otherwise channels a bigger demon to go up against this guy who's doing these rituals. All the while, John Constantine is very experienced. He doesn't know things like binding spells, and then ultimately this demon starts running amok and starts killing everybody in the room. And he's like, oh crap. Like, dude, I picked a much stronger demon to beat a demon, and now, like, everybody's getting killed and basically, like, sucked into hell. Like, oops, my mistake. So, we ultimately realize that John tends to make a lot of mistakes, or just kind of sends a much stronger demon in to defeat weaker Esh like things. And that is kind of his like his battle plan throughout this entire movie. We eventually have it to where John meets up with this person that gave him directions of where to go, ultimately showcasing this kind of very much hell on earth environment. We eventually have this guy otherwise showcase us that there's an entire pool of bodies that basically he wants to eventually take all the bodies out so ultimately he can just swim in a pool of blood. Eventually we find out this demon that was possessing this girl, his main crux is that this guy has some competition in Los Angeles. And so ultimately he wants Constantine to get rid of the competition. Simple enough. John Constantine ends up realizing that it's like, hey, like, well, since there are five other demons that I have to take out to ultimately kind of get this guy to otherwise get rid of all of his competition, I'm going to send one really strong Egyptian monster to ultimately just beat all of these demons. And then eventually, once the demon beats all of the competition, like the demon is just like, well, hey, okay, great, Constantine, because ultimately, this is a demon that ultimately likes to consume other demons. But when basically like the demon is fat and whatever and just kind of like, oh, okay, well, it's great that I beat all these demons, like, are you just gonna set me free or what's going on? And Constantine's just like, well, no, like, if anything, now I'm just going to just destroy you. I'm going to destroy you as I'm going to destroy who you were, because ultimately, like, there's no way that he's gonna just let him loose on Los Angeles. We get to the point where, as well as Constantine consistently trying to beat these demons, we also have just a bunch of times where it seems like demons are consistently chasing Constantine, to the point of like there's a ton uh, of dogs that are kind of chasing after Constantine's car, which I thought was a really impressive visual for me. Um, and this and that. Ultimately, eventually, we get to some entity that is helping Constantine out in the form of just random people. We eventually find that the city of Los Angeles has its own spiritual demon, and we get to where that demon ultimately wants to seduce Constantine. Um, yeah, this this demon is supposedly like the city of angels, or the I guess you can call them the the queen of angels, or however you want to break that down. But this is a very much like this is very much entity that ultimately is just kind of a means to an end, because ultimately she this Los Angeles kind of entity wants to get rid of this demon as well as Constantine does. So she tries to help him out. But anyways, cruxing us back to eventually have a ton of sequences of Constantine before him fighting every single one of these other five demon competitor ash like things. We have a very much sequence of this demon showcasing all these like very like absurd visuals where we have all these like Constantine dancing and ultimately like people bizarrely getting whipped with whips on this dance floor and this and that. It's very weird and absurd and very much interesting. We have Constantine being teleported into space, and ultimately eventually he like starts to freeze up and then almost get consumed by a monster and this and that. A lot of weird and bizarre visuals going on. But I just thought I could just quick kind of bash and bring that up. Cue, cue us eventually having Constantine beating all these demons and coming right back to um, going like, oh, okay, I did the thing that you wanted, demon. Now I'll let my friend go. Well, This demon, of course, does not want to, like, release this girl. Like, he just doesn't. Ultimately, we realize this demon is ultimately the original demon from the time of which John Constantine was much younger. And, like, I was ultimately just like, well, like, how could you not exactly see this coming? Yeah, it looks like two different demons, but when looking at it, I'm like, well, there has to be like the kind of foreshadowing demon to come back in this movie, or he has to be the big bad somehow or another, because ultimately they basically said that John like could not control this demon or could not get him like um to go back from once he came. So I was ultimately figuring, like, well, how is this going to come back into the story later on? And surefire enough, it does. Eventually, this guy that otherwise kind of like um, removes this whole like body of made of just bizarre amounts of flesh, we realize that it's the demon from Constantine's past. And ultimately, Constantine starts fighting this demon, and ultimately, since this demon was simply uh, wanting to break out all of his competition, John otherwise decides to. It's like, oh, well, hey, you didn't want any competition. Well, like, you told me to knock out all these guys before, but hey, how about I open up just gates of hell, and all of a sudden I give you much more competition than you would like? Ultimately, the demon calls Constantine on his bluff because he's like, dude, you can't exactly just open the gates of hell. You're just kind of really just doing, um, you're just really just kind of doing like uh, a facade or some kind of charade. Like, you would never actually unleash the entire gates of hell on Earth. Come on, John. Like, come on. So eventually we get to where John turns to his best friend and ultimately asks him if if him saying that he would do anything for his daughter was like, are you absolutely sure that you would do anything absolutely for your daughter? Because otherwise, they're going to lose this kid because this demon just does not want to get um, let cut loose of this girl. And ultimately, it's either that she's going to be in a coma forever, or um, or that she's going to be sent to hell. So John ultimately has this magic spell that he uses the love of the mother and the daughter, um, the love that they have. He takes that and uses that against this demon, and with the nightmare nurse helping out, kind of just um, combining that love power against this demon. And then eventually John and Chaz are both holding on to one another and kind of having um, their power go up against this demon, and eventually this demon starts falling apart. To ultimately, right before the demon goes, he ultimately throws one chip to Constantine to ultimately say, hey, like, I have a bargain. Like, I think he has, like, Astra, who ultimately was the one missing girl that was sucked down into hell. kind of really showcasing John Constantine's origin of why he does magic and he helps people. If you watch the Constantine show, that whole scene thing kind of tends to come up a lot. Um, Ultimately, John says bugger off, sucking this demon to hell, and eventually Chaz gets his daughter back, and he's just so happy and so like elated that John was able to actually do this and it would all work out. The only problem is that there's a catch, there's a sacrifice. I wasn't like knowing just kind of how John Constantine stuff tends to go. I'm like, oh god, is Chaz going to have to die for his daughter to live? Because that's usually how things are. It's like for a lot of Constantine stories, I think the reason why this character is probably the best kind of supernatural character is even when John wins, he still loses. He still loses something. And I think that's what makes this story much more intriguing than any other kind of comic book hero is just because yeah, it might look like John wins, but he always still loses. He still has this karma or this kind of equilibrium of wins and losses, just equal every single time. So John and Chaz are just kind of like hurrah or huzzah about their whole victory that they had made. Ultimately, John sits Chaz down and ultimately mentions to him, it's like, hey, like I told you there would be a ultimate sacrifice to this whole thing. I had this whole like card up my sleeve that like if nothing else worked, then this thing did. So Chaz is very reluctant to just be like, oh yeah, but like what is that one card? So ultimately, John breaks down to Chaz that it's like, well, yeah, I used the love of you, Chaz, your wife and your daughter. I used like the power of your love to defeat this demon. The only problem is now the wife and the daughter is not no longer going to remember Chaz. It's going to be within the matter of Chad never existed in their life. He basically erased their existence from their like Constantine erased Chad's existence from his wife and daughter's life. I'm like, oh my god. Like, this is like. It's like a win, but it's also a giant loss. But then also, Chaz. But that's not all. Like, so Chaz starts to forget about his wife and about his daughter, and like Constantine is just like, well, again, that's not all. Ultimately, John had to use his friendship, the power of friendship between Chaz and John, and throw it into the hat as well to defeat this demon. And so ultimately, Chaz will never remember John Constantine and that he saved his daughter. I'm like, oh my god. So this guy otherwise just like he wins, but he loses everything. Constantine loses everything. He loses that long termed friendship just to defeat a demon that had been held over him for a very long time. But ultimately we have the spirit of Los Angeles coming back and ultimately just like, hey, do you want a second round of kind of pleasure, Mr. Constantine, and this and that? He's like, well, yeah, if I'm gonna be knocking boots in another city, like I'm gonna be knocking it in London, because of course, John Constantine consistently mentions how like he is homesick and that he wants to go back to London and this and that, and like Los Angeles was just kind of a pit stop for him and this and that. Um, yeah, a really quickly and easily to explain story compared to a lot of other things. I kind of like that John Constantine keeps around um, one of his dream esh like sequence characters because he just needs a friend. I thought that was kind of funny. When going through this, I was expecting like there was one entity that had possessed people, and I'd almost assumed at one point that I'm like, oh, is that Boston Brand? Is that Deadman? Is that how we like kind of slowly go into eventually a Justice League Dark or something like that? Or like I was assuming Deadman was in this story, but then I eventually realized that it's like, oh no, it's not Deadman. It's just the spirit of St. Louis, um, or uh, the the queen or the demon or whatever of St. Louis, um, or the Saint Los Angeles. What am I saying? St. Louis. Um, yeah, Los Angeles, L.A. This and that. But yeah, eventually that spirit ultimately kind of picks up Chaz and ultimately kind of walks him and tries to get him and protect him and whatever and this and that. But anyways, yeah. So Chaz ultimately like forgets Constantine and then like gets out of the table that he's at and walks away, and then the uh the spirit of Los Angeles or whatever comes and picks him up and this and that. And then eventually John Constantine just kind of walks out and just kind of uh rides off into the sunset. Like I said, this was a really great animated movie compared to a lot of others. Compared to a lot of others in recent time, in my mind, that were just kind of a lot of soft serving time filler esh like things. This movie, I don't feel wasted any time. I felt like this is a good introduction to Constantine if people have never seen the Keanu Reeves movie or ultimately haven't seen or read a book about Constantine. This is a very good introduction point. I overall really enjoyed this compared to a lot of other animated movies. I really just thought like this one and probably Under the Red Hood or probably Batman of the Red Hood are probably two of the best animated movies for DC because ultimately everything else just kind of gets mucked up with there just kind of being kind of too many characters that don't need to be in something or a lot of things like I kind of also liked Suicide Squad, Assault on Arkham. I think that was a pretty good movie to overall just kind of wash out the Suicide Squad in an animated way about going things. But yeah, I think that's all I'm going to get to into this review, so I'm going to get out of here. Goodbye, everybody. Goodbye, everybody.